So yeah, first of all, just thank you so much for volunteering your time today. I really appreciate it, and yeah, excited to have a chat. So yeah, I was wondering whether you could sort of talk us through what your role looks like and maybe what a typical working week looks like for you.
My current role, yeah, of course. So I am the founder and director of Street Storage, which is the only storage unit charity in its own right for people experiencing homelessness in all kinds of forms. So that's vulnerable housing, going into prison, coming out of prison, leaving domestic abuse, sleeping on the street, leaving temporary accommodation, being evicted, hotels and hostels. So pretty broad. My role currently is slightly stepped back from the front lines. So we have a staff team here who do the appointments, the referrals, the outreach, the storage appointments, the storage admin, all of that sort of stuff, and all the casework and advocacy that we do. I do everything else to make sure that the charity runs. So I have done the majority of our fundraising. In the past year, I've also done a lot more of our hiring. So all of our HR stuff. So that includes all the policies for HR, the employment handbooks, the legal stuff, the payroll, all of that sort of stuff. And now we've got a team, we've got a fundraiser, and we've got two staff members on the ground here. So they are taking some of that role away. But previously I'd had to do a lot of fundraising for the organization. I have to do a lot of strategy, a lot of growth, kind of development. So we work a lot with our board, we work with business development mentors, we work with growth mentors. We've just won 2 awards for development across the UK. So we're looking at how to replicate the model, how to make it the best it can be here in London for the community, but also for the safety of our staff and for the demand that we're seeing. And then once we've kind of smoothed over London, we're looking at replicating the model in a sort of playbook. And then I will go and consult in different cities to expand the model into cities like Manchester and Edinburgh, where there's like quite significant housing issues. So I do a lot of strategy, a lot of growth. I do a lot of networking, campaigning, speaking on behalf of the organization. So I'm on panels a lot. I speak on Zooms. I go to events and conferences about housing and homelessness. We're also part of 2 quite important campaigns. The first is Action on Empty Homes. So I do that once every sort of few weeks, which is sometimes we do stunts and protest outside empty homes and empty prisons and empty hospitals because there's people sleeping on the street and there's empty buildings. And then a lot of it is policy and kind of writing papers and campaigning to the government to make change around housing law. The other one is what I mentioned yesterday, which was I'm part of the Dying Homeless Coalition, which is a coalition of sector staff and people with lived experience, people who are currently on the street. And they do, again, campaigns, policy, stunts, appeals, fundraising to have a national registration of homelessness deaths in the UK. So to make it legal for local authorities to register people who die on the street and name them and remember them. So I do a general working week can be very varied. It will involve probably 2 events, a couple of Zooms where I speak on behalf of the organisation. It will involve me doing a lot of accounting, some fundraising, some HR stuff, a little bit of strategy. That's pretty much it, really. It's kind of everything that's operational and back end that you can think of that isn't actually seeing people on the street and then helping them with their storage.
Awesome. Kind of like leading on from that, I was wondering like what you've found different about setting up your own charity versus like working in an established one already.
I think the first thing I would say is you feel a lot greater sense of ownership, and with that comes a lot greater. This is 9 a.m. This is what happens at 9 a.m. That makes no sense. You feel a much greater sense of responsibility, and that's not just for the organization, it's for the financial sustainability of the organization, it's for the safety of your staff, it's for the protection of the brand, it's for the smooth running of the service. Because if someone attacks the service, if you work in a crisis or a shelter, or St Mungo's, people are going to slag you off left, right and centre, but you're one of 700 staff. And so you're like, well, this is my job, like whatever. Whereas if Tax, a very small organization that you have founded and created, it feels much more personal. So for me, on a personal level, that's been much harder to learn not to take everything personally, to take it as feedback, to see what we can improve, to see if it's not really important and it's just kind of someone upset with us for some reason. So that's been really difficult. I feel like some of the positives of it is that you have kind of no accountability in a way. When you set it up, you can set it up from scratch, and you can set it up with, so I've gone into larger organizations where you've then had to kind of look back on the policies that they had and do everything in retrospect. So you have to change all their policies that already exist, which involves changing all the existing policies, telling all the staff, training them in the new policies, changing GDPR laws every year, you know, all this sort of stuff. Whereas when you set up something yourself, you can set it up from scratch. So we started with a kind of ethos of best practice. And it means that we had everything in place before we had our first storage unit. So you have the ownership comes with a lot of responsibility and fear, but it also comes with complete control. So I can go to my trustees and say, this is my organization, this is what I want to do, this, that, and the other. What are your challenges to that? What do you see are the problems? Can we have a discussion about it? Whereas in a larger organization, you don't have that kind of flexibility at all. In a smaller organization that you founded yourself, you have complete funding freedom as well. So we've taken no statutory money at all for this. So we're not related to any local authority, government, or DULHC money at all. MHCLG funding, nothing. So it's all grants, trusts, and personal donations and stuff, which means that we have a lot more flexibility about what we do with our money. It means that we have a greater respect from our beneficiaries, because we're not quoted to do what the local authority says, and we're not the system. We're kind of our own little niche organization. And I think there's a sense of I don't know, when you found an organization or set it up yourself, there I feel like there's a lot greater sense of pride in what you're doing every day. I can imagine if I went in to work as a caseworker in a shelter or a St Mungo's, that I'd just be a bit sort of disillusioned, and you know, you'd see 200 people a day and the relationships would be quite like base level, like quite shallow, I think. And here we've got some really, really in-depth people who rely on us for all kinds of stuff, and we know every single person who walks through the doors. It's just a much more personal experience because it's quite small. If you'd asked me that question in 10 years and I have 20 units across the UK, that might not be the case. But currently, you can build a sense of real strong community and culture from the ground up, because you're starting from best practice up. So it has positives and negatives.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, that's so interesting. I was kind of wondering, you kind of briefly touched on that just there, but I was wondering what your route into kind of working in the charitable sector was.
I left university in 2012. Like most kids, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a teacher, and then I lived next to a PGCE student, and he put me completely off being a teacher ever. So I was like, no, okay, that's fine. I'm not going to impart knowledge. I'll do something else. So I got a job in the city as a PA, because I'm really, really organized and I love spreadsheets and diaries, and I'm really good at that. So I did that for a while. I loved it. The culture wasn't really for me. It was very corporate. It was very smart. I had to buy a whole bunch of different clothes, and it was all very sort of, we went to the gym and had a salad, and we're doing a marathon on a Saturday morning, which is great, and you do you, but that's just not who I am. I'm a bit more kind of earthy and a bit more kind of, I need to be doing something that means something. So I volunteered every Wednesday night at a night shelter. And I would go and I would make food for the guys and just sit and chat to them. And it was beyond the highlight of my week. And so I started volunteering a little bit more for that charity. And it was so obvious to me that this was the only thing that I looked forward to in the week, that I was like, why jobs exist in this sector? Why do I work in the city that, kills my soul? So they then asked for a part-time coordinator of it was like a shelter network. So there were 7 shelters in Islington, and they asked for a coordinator across those 7 shelters. So I did that for 3 years as part-time and full-time. And then that kind of solidified it. And then I worked in a drug and rehab project. I worked in a mentoring and befriending project. So like a kind of low-level peer support therapy project. And then I ran managed a day center for nearly 4 years. and then I founded Street Storage. So I kind of fell into the volunteering because it was at the church that I went to near my house. And then I volunteered a lot more. And then I decided that actually, this is why I get up in the morning and this is what I want to do. So, and there's something quite freeing in picking. So I probably wouldn't now work in charity in the broader sense. So I wouldn't suddenly go and work for an MS charity or an animal charity. I think I will just stick with homelessness because there's always so much to learn and there's so much that changes. And I know so many people in this sector now that I actually feel like there's something very rewarding in knowing what you do for a living and who you are, because so many people just don't identify with their job. They don't know what they want to do or who they want to be or whatever. And actually, I think this is it for me. So yeah, so I'm very lucky that I sort of fell into it, I guess.
Yeah, awesome. Kind of like really quickly on that, like how important for you is it to like work in a role that aligns with your like personal values?
Yeah, quite important. I am what I call a Christian, and by that I mean I don't read the Bible, I don't pray that much, I can't quote stuff at you. You wouldn't know because I swear all the time, and I do a lot for the church that I go to in London here, but I'm not what people assume Christians are. I'm not particularly gentle as a person. I'm not particularly empathetic. But I believe a lot in faith through action. So I believe that if you believe that there is good in the world and you should do something good, and you believe that there is a God who is benevolent, and so community is probably more my faith than actual Christianity proper. So community is the most important thing in my life. My church community, my husband's a councillor for the Labour Party, and so the Labour community, we know all of our neighbours. And the homelessness community. So I have some really strong communities in my life, and I believe that personally, I believe in action.
Yeah, kind of like briefly on from that, like you mentioned kind of like your route into setting up Street Storage, but I was wondering what like the process of like actually setting up was. Like what kind of hoops did you have to jump through? Like what was that like kind of building something?
So I did a bit of what you would call market research, I guess, without wanting to sound too businessy. And in the day centre and in the night shelter, I kept getting asked about storage. And I thought there must be, we've got crisis, we've got some Mungos, we've got shelter. They must be providing warehouses of storage units for people leaving home or temporary accommodation. There's loads of people who need storage. And they have some grants and some storage memberships at Big Yellow and Access Self-Storage. And some people were keeping their stuff with a friend of a cousin's best mate, or a vicar keeps my bag, but I can only access it on a Saturday afternoon between 2 and 4. And I was thinking, this is nuts. There must be something that exists. There wasn't. And so I then literally Googled, how do you set up a charity? And the government website has a very easy step-by-step sort of, this is what you do. The first thing you needed to do was find 3 trustees who were willing to effectively take a punt on an idea, which is, it wasn't hard for me to find them, but it was hard. It was nerve-wracking because if you pick the wrong people, it can really change the organization, the direction that it goes. So I picked someone who volunteered at the day centre that I managed, and he was fantastic. He's in insurance, and the insurance for homeless people's belongings was a real concern because no one's ever done anything like this before. Also, the monetary value of people's items that they're bringing in is so low that an insurance company can't value it. So I had insurance companies saying, oh, sorry, we've never done this before, so we don't know what to put the premium at. We can't help you. Or we said, sorry, it's not really worth anything, so there's no point us covering you. So it took me nearly 6 months to find an insurer. So I wanted someone on the board who did insurance and who understood that and who could read the policies, because that was the most important thing for me, was if there's a fire or I get hit by a bus, is people's stuff safe? Because, it's not our stuff. We have homes, we have people who could go in and look after it. This is everything they own, and it's in my care. So that was important. And then I had someone who was kind of digital. So someone who could help me set up the website, help me do the social media, help me understand like how to get the brand out there, how to make a logo, that kind of stuff. And then I had someone who was money. So accountant. I had brought on an accountant who was my best friend from Cambridge. And she's still with us. She's our treasurer. And so I wanted to cover the areas that I knew would be important for setting up an organization. So insurance, financial and fundraising, and then marketing and branding. And luckily they all said yes, so they were set up. And then you have to write a constitution, which is like a 42-page document that makes no sense to anyone, but they do have quite an easy kind of step-by-step following kind of process. The hardest thing for me, there were sort of 2-3 things after that were really difficult. So you have to decide whether you want to be a registered company, a charity incorporated association, a CIO, which is a charitable incorporated organization, which is what we are, company limited by guarantee. There's loads of different, and there's positives and negatives to all of those. So if you're a registered company, you can register with Companies House and you can have social enterprises like charity shops. If you are there's one that you have to pay £5,000 to become, which I think is a registered charity from day one. And I didn't have a spare £5,000. So I was like, I didn't want to borrow it from the savings. So I thought, no. So we did CIO and we went through that route, and you can change them, but it takes a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork. The problem I then had was twofold. Before the pandemic, it took about 9 months for a charity to be registered, because there were not that many people working at the Charities Commission, or it took a long time for the bureaucracy to come through. During the pandemic, so many mutual aid groups founded charities to support their community that they've now made it 45 working days. So I've got a friend who's setting up a charity now, and he's going to have it in like 2 months. And I waited nearly a year. And we were doing one thing. We want to store people's possessions. We weren't doing mental health advocacy or healthcare on the street, like something that was really complex. We were doing something very, very easy to understand and very simple, and it still took 9 months. The worst thing, and the thing that I highlight to everybody who, again, which has become easier post-pandemic, is bank accounts. I definitely cried in 3 banks because they told me I couldn't have a bank account without a registered charity number. You can't apply for the Charities Commission with a registered charity number without a bank account. And then once you've got your registered charity number, it's much easier to get grant funding and foundation funding and official funding bodies to support you. The challenge is, where do you get your funding to set up? I wanted to set up all the policies and the website and the branding before I got a unit. Once I'd got a unit, I didn't want to wait 9 months for the Charity Commission. I just wanted to start. And so I did start, but it meant that I had to find funding that wasn't tied to a registered charity number, which is difficult because as a funder, it's hard to there's no accountability if you don't have a registration with the commission. So a lot of like official funders local authorities wouldn't fund it, funders wouldn't fund it. So I had to find, again, I went down the community route. So I started with something called local initiative funding, which is small pots of money that the councillors in a ward of a council have to give community groups, like little gardening groups and stuff. So they don't have to be a full-blown organization. It's just a local community, like, some old women doing knitting for people with Alzheimer's, that kind of thing. They will be able to have lift funding, which is probably 2 to 5 grand, like really not much, but that paid for some shelving units and for some boxes and for me to get the word out and for me to do 2-4 hours a week or something on it. And then once I'd got that and could prove to all the services who referred to us and the local authority that we've actually got something that works here, like on 5 to 10 grand, I think I borrowed some money, or I got some money off my friends and family just to be like, look, I've got this thing. Would you like to take a risk on it? And, if you know people who can contribute like 500 quid or something, that makes a big difference in a small organization. So I think I probably started with about 10 or 15,000 pounds across sort of 4 or 5 months. And I was working 3 jobs or something hideous. And that was enough to pilot a 20-person storage unit and to prove that the need was there. I filled it in 3 days or 4 days, something ridiculous. I was given 4 weeks by the local authority and to say, prove that this is a need. And I think I filled it in 3 days. And I said, look, this is clear. And then from there, we went on to get the registration number, get a proper unit in London, like a bigger one, so we could actually full on fund the shelving and the lockers and staff to run that unit. And then as soon as we got that charity number, it was just a case of applying for funding like every other charity does.
I was kind of wondering on the sort of like employment side of things, like for someone who's maybe thinking about entering like the charitable sector, like a lot of people recommend like getting work experience or maybe not an internship and maybe like a longer term placement. Like how important do you think work experience is for someone wanting to enter kind of?
I actually went to Cambridge a few weeks ago and did a panel about just this. And And volunteering came up again and again as like kind of one of the most important ways. Obviously, you've heard that that's how I got into it. It is, I think it's harder to know. My advice to the people at on the panel was, if you're not sure about which sector of the charity sector, which part of the charity sector you want to go into, it's slightly harder because you kind of have a massively wide net and you can just apply for internships or volunteering roles or longer placements depending on what your degree is. But I would advise people to seriously think about what they're passionate about, because charity is not easy to work in. They don't pay well, you know, especially for people leaving university. Like, you're trying to pay rent for the first time and you have to pay bills and stuff. Like, it doesn't pay well, especially at the lower end. And it's intense. It's hard mentally, it's hard physically at times, emotionally. And so if there's a cause, often people have causes. So the environment, disabled children, mine was homelessness, because I don't even know why mine was homelessness, it just is. But have a think about what your cause might be, and then do some research around the sort of size of organization. So I can only speak for homelessness, but obviously if I was looking at an internship or volunteering, I would probably, there's two strands. You can go into a larger organization, volunteering experience. You'll probably get it quicker, and you'll probably get an internship or a longer term placement because they have thousands of staff, and you'll probably learn a lot very quickly, and it will look really good on a CV to say, you know, I worked for Crisis in the outreach team and street health team for 6 months, and I just went along with the outreach team and I did bandages for people on the street who had cut themselves, for example. And it's probably easier to get in to a larger organization because they're used to using interns and volunteers like that. In a smaller organization, what's hard is that often staff don't have the capacity to support the volunteers in the same way because they're also doing 90 other things. So they will only ask for very specific volunteering. So we need someone, for example, to come in and do the following with marketing. If, you know, we need website, we need logo, we need someone to look at our SEO. And I've got a job spec for a marketing volunteer currently, and it's very specific. We wouldn't have the time or capacity to have someone come in and do sort of relative small bits of admin, because it would just take too much staff time to look after them and support them properly. That being said, if there's anyone you know, I also said on the panel, think outside the box. Have you got any friends of your family, friends of your friends, people who you went to school with, teachers who you went to school with, someone who might work in the charity sector or have worked in the charity sector? Because that's a really, really good way in, to have an introduction from someone who already works there or who knows about it. Because if you can get into a smaller organization, your experience will be huge, because you will be doing, if you go into a larger organization, you probably will find yourself very kind of pigeonholed into doing one thing. Like, you are doing Crisis at Christmas for 3 weeks, and that's great, but you will just do Crisis at Christmas. Whereas in a smaller organization, you'll probably get to see a lot more about how a charity works. I would think in the charity sector now, in recruiting for the charity sector now, it probably is quite important to have an internship or a volunteering role or a placement. That being said, it doesn't matter quite what that is. It doesn't have to be in the charity sector, as long as you can prove your transferable skills. So I had no experience in the charity sector and got this job. Not this one, the first one I did. You know, and that's helpful, because if you can say, you know, I worked as a secretary for a year in a city office, which is effectively what I was doing. It means I can communicate, I can build a spreadsheet, I can use emails, I can manage a CEO's diary, I can, you know, and that means in the charity sector, I can do the following 5 things. And what I would say is that really, I think what people are looking for when they recruit now in the sector is passion and an understanding of the issues that charity is facing. So for example, if you were to come and say, I want to volunteer at street storage, I'd be like, okay, why? Like, why us? You know, do you know anything about homelessness stats? Do you know anything about, you know, have you spoken to anyone who slept on the street? Do you know what the sector looks like in terms of how people access accommodation, what the big charities are, what the small charities are? You know, do the research before you look at internships and volunteering and longer placements, because charities, especially smaller ones, really care about what they're doing. And I would say, yeah, my most important kind of piece of wisdom or whatever is try and pick your cause And then you can do loads of stuff around that, because you can do the research to who the organizations are, what they care about, what they're campaigning about, who they work with, who their partners are, what the news is around that issue. And then you start hearing about these organizations, and then you can go and apply saying, I went to an event that you guys did, and it was for example, if I wanted to work in homelessness, I would have gone to the vigil last night. I would have checked Twitter of all these random organizations, gone to the vigil and said, look, I was at this vigil for the 1,286 people who died. It was really moving, and I really want to campaign to stop that happening. And I understand that this organization campaigns to the government to stop that happening. Can I help? Do you see how that's different to just like, oh, I want to work in charity because it's like good, and like I want to be a nice person? Like, it has to be really targeted, I think. That would be my advice anyway, because it's so difficult to get a kind of generalized charity job, and it's just such a big field. You'd just be lost.
It's so interesting. And I was kind of wondering, kind of following on from that, what advice you'd give to someone who, say, like has a cause, like has a passion, but doesn't really know whether to pursue that in like a voluntary capacity, or whether to go into it from like an employment point of view. Like, I know you talked about how you volunteered on a Wednesday evening, but that was more like on the voluntary side of stuff. So yeah, wondering like what advice you'd have for that person.
I think I'm always kind of focused on who you are as a person and what kind of lifestyle you want. So I have a lot of friends who work in very, very senior roles in PwC, Ernst & Young, all of the type that you'll hear from uni, all of the consultancy roles. And that's because they wanted a certain life. They wanted the 4-bedroom house in Surrey, the ski chalet and whatever. And that's absolutely fine. And they're some of my closest friends. You're not going to get that if you work in the charity sector. You kind of have to look at your priorities as a person and what you want for your life, which is quite hard to do when you're like 21 and be like, well, I don't know where I want to be when I'm 40, because it seems really old to me. But it's, I knew that I didn't want children. I didn't want to buy a house. It didn't bother me. So I could kind of do whatever I wanted because it didn't rely on me having 100 grand. And so I had a bit more freedom. But different people prioritize different things. Some people want a really big family. And for a really big family, you have to have a bigger house, and you have to live outside London, and you have to either get really high up in the charity sector really quickly, or you have to do something else to fund that. And you can volunteer, or you can financially support an organization. There are loads of ways that you can help the charity sector without working in the charity sector. But I think it really just comes down to whether you actually want to do it full time, whether you want to get up and do it 10 hours a day. I would say that there are loads of volunteering opportunities in the evening, in the day, at the weekends. There's loads of stuff you can do off-site, like marketing, fundraising applications for charities. You can do fundraising yourself, like marathons and runs and stuff. You can do internships. You can pay money if you're earning a load of money. You can give money, which is really invaluable. So there's loads of ways. It doesn't mean that if you're not working in the sector, you're not helping the sector. But I would think about it in terms of the lifestyle that you want and where you want to live and what you want from your job. Because it's, as I say, it's intense, it's physically intense, emotionally, spiritually, but I wouldn't work anywhere else. I literally wouldn't do anything else right now. So I think about who you are as a person and where you want to be. You might volunteer for a bit and decide that actually you definitely don't want to work in this. So I think, especially because you're in your first year, if you have a cause, if you have a passion, maybe have a look at the volunteering opportunities in Cambridge, like around the town, and see what's around and see what's about, to get some experience and stuff, and actually to see whether you want to commit to it, because it's a decision. Again, it's not a final decision, but it would just be good to start now and think about, because you have to see it as a sort of what charities exist in this space, and therefore what opportunities are in this space. And also, once you get to know the charities that exist in that space, you'll get to know the roles within those organizations. So do you want to do fundraising? Do you want to do marketing? Do you want to do strategy? Do you want to do on the ground actual casework? Do you want to do, there's loads of roles within a charity sector that you've chosen. So, even if you choose to work within homelessness, you could be anything. You could be a caseworker, a marketer, a fundraiser, there's loads. So it can be quite varied. But yeah, I wouldn't ever advise someone to work rather than volunteer, or volunteer rather than work. But again, I would really emphasize, just like, think about what you want from your life and who you are, and what would be easier for you to do.
Thank you so much. kind of really quickly, like I was wondering what the transition from like the Cambridge environment when it's all kind of super theoretical, because you sort of briefly talked about this kind of towards the beginning, about like going from that kind of very theoretical, very like kind of bubbled environment to kind of the real world, and also maybe the transition from like any student activism into like kind of real world activism. Like what was kind of the change or like the shift for you?
I think I really enjoyed the change because being an action person, I found Cambridge quite difficult because it was so cerebral. It was so thoughtful and so in depth and terrifying in most ways. But I didn't do much student activism, if I'm honest. I was a hockey player, so that took up most of my week. Went to church on the Sunday, so that took up some of the time. Also, I'm not naturally an academic, so I was like doing like 12 hours of work a day, like, oh, I can't do it. But I think the difference between student activism and real life activism is that a lot of the student activism that students do across the country won't make that much change. I'm not saying historically, because historically students have been the ones who've actually raised issues and campaigned and done sit-ins and actually made change. But currently, I'm not seeing that much change because students are raising issues. What happens in the real world is that obviously, I think the biggest difference is that in the real world, you've got an organization behind you or a charity behind you or a cause behind you, and you're working in partnership with a whole bunch of other organizations that have that weight. And so, for example, when we campaign against Pentonville Prison being left empty for 5 years, it's Street Storage, it's another 2 homelessness organizations, we've got 4 local authorities supporting us, we've got a housing association, we've got lawyers, we've got 2 or 3 newspapers and a couple of news stations as well. So you've got, I think real world activism is actually easier because you can kind of piggyback on the existing campaigns that are happening, and they've got so much weight behind them because of the respect that these organizations and these news outlets have. But that being said, you know, students have changed the world in the past, so I'm not dismissing what student activism does. I just think that it becomes because I think student activism, when I did it, tended to be more about my rights as a student, or the way the university ran, or the way that this happened or this decision was made. Whereas in the real world, you're representing another cause that isn't directly affecting you. Not always the case, but for me, that was the case. And I think just in general, the transition from university to the real world is kind of, I don't know, I preferred it because I felt like I was actually getting something done and doing something. I think I quite liked getting out of my own head and out of the books and out of the library. I'm not an academic, I'm not a thinker. And so I liked the opportunity. I really valued the training that Cambridge gave me in that. So I can be cerebral, I can think through things, I can read and analyze text if I need to, and I can form an argument and write an essay. But it was, for me, it was very important to actually get out and do some stuff with that training to get into the real world and realize that it was such a bubble, as you said. Like it's so unique, and no one will understand unless you've been there. Like it's just nuts. And so I think for me, coming out of that bubble was harder than actually the sort of cerebral to action transition. I think the transition, because also, I don't know where you grew up, but I grew up in a tiny little village near Wales, and then I went to a tiny little university in Cambridge, and then I was like in central London. And so for me, it was like, oh, okay, this is huge, this world is huge. But it's brilliant, like, because you realize that there are so many different people out there with so many different things and so many different backgrounds and cultures. And I think for me, that was the most important thing, because I saw one homeless guy in my entire childhood. There were like 2 black kids in my school, like, and they made a whole big deal of the fact that that was that. And, you come to London and everyone is everyone. And I love that. And that's really changed who I am. And it's changed my political values. It's changed my cultural values, my social values, everything.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering, like, maybe finishing up slightly, like whether there's any kind of topics you want to like discuss, or like anything else you want to bring up in like relation to like your role or like employment, or just anything really.
I think, no, for me, I just wanted to know a little bit more about what you were thinking and kind of why. So this was through Cambridge Careers, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so you must have kind of been talking to or been looking at people who've worked in the charity sector, or is it people who founded stuff? Are you interested in like a social enterprise or a business or charity? Like, where are you coming from? I'm just kind of interested to, and if there's anything I've got that's relevant to that then I'll say it. But I'm just interested to kind of know what you're thinking, because you've clearly got your head screwed on right. If you're in your first year and you're already doing this, like, I don't want to patronize you, but it's impressive.
I mean, like, I really don't know what I want to do career-wise, but I think like I don't know, I've always been kind of interested in like the charity sector, but I always just assumed it would be in like a voluntary capacity. Like, I've always been involved with like stuff outside of school in terms of like volunteering, or like I like kind of work at a food bank whenever I'm home, like that kind of thing.
That's really good. You've got experience. Most people don't have experience when they start looking for experience, so you're already way ahead, and good for you. That's something good to do. Right?
Yeah, and it's been super rewarding, and like yeah, I think like coming to Cambridge and like going to like a couple of the careers events, because obviously like I don't know what I want to do, it kind of made me aware that I could like work in the charity sector as well as just like in a voluntary way.
And if you're volunteering, wouldn't it be better to get paid?
Yeah,
like, that's how I felt. I was like, why am I going to work in a job I hate and not getting paid for a job I love, when I know that there are jobs in the voluntary thing that I'm doing? Like, I could get paid to do this.
yeah, definitely.
I was like, that's great. I mean, you don't get paid well, but you do get paid. Like, it's great.
But yeah, like I just trying to think, I don't know what else there is really. I'm very aware that like I obviously my life experience, I'm 18, like I barely know anything, and I'm just trying to like absorb as many like perspectives and like opportunities as I can. And yeah, just I don't really know any people from home who like work in like the charity sector or have like founded a charity or anything like that. So just kind of eager to kind of imbibe all of that knowledge, I guess. But yeah, post Cambridge, I'm not really sure what I want to do yet, but I think charity sector is looking appealing.
Amazing. You don't have to be sure, and you don't have to be sure 5 years after Cambridge. You don't have to be sure 20 years after Cambridge. By the way, I went to say, like, I live my life on my emails. So if you forget anything or you want me to clarify anything that can be slightly more measured, because I'll have to type it, so I won't just ramble on and on. Let me know. Just send me an email and say, look, I forgot to ask you this thing. I do a lot with Cambridge careers. So if, there's people who I've spoken to, a couple of people before who we've had Zooms and they've just followed up with a couple of questions, or if you decide later on in the year or 2 years time, oh, I actually do want to go into the charity sector, I wonder if Rachel knows anybody who works in X, because I'll go to like a GDPR event, or I'll do something to do with GDPR, and I'll meet a whole bunch of people from a whole bunch of different charities who are nothing to do with homelessness, but who all want to learn about GDPR, for example. So you never know who knows who. So do feel free to kind of ask and send me an email. And if I can't help, I'll tell you I can't help. And if I haven't got time, I'll tell you I don't have time. But most of the time I will. So yeah, if I've forgotten anything or you've forgotten anything, let me know.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed like speaking to you today. Like as I said, I don't know anyone who sort of works in your sector before. So perfect. Thank you so much. Really.
Have a good Friday. Good luck with the last term.
Thank you.
The next 2 years. Fingers crossed.
Thank you so much.